There are 193 countries in the United Nations today. Of these, one has been singled out as an especially egregious offender of the organization's mandate to preserve and enhance human freedom and tolerance. Can you guess which it is? It has about 7 million citizens, of whom a fifth are Arab. The government is vibrantly democratic, its press wide open, and religious freedom fully respected. Women have equal rights and gays live openly. The answer is Israel. Here are some facts. 38% of all the resolutions of the United Nations Human Rights Council, the UN's top human rights body, that are critical of specific countries have been directed at Israel alone. The Council has a permanent agenda that governs every regular session. This agenda is composed of 10 items, one of which is always reserved for criticizing Israel. Between 2006, when the Council was created, and 2012, it published 48 reports condemning Israel. During that same period, there were 9 reports on Syria's mass killings and torture of its own citizens, 3 on Iran's genocide-threatening regime, and not one on, for example, China, which denies more than 1 billion people elementary freedoms. I could go on, but I think you get the idea. So we are faced with a choice. Either there's something very wrong with Israel that I'm not telling you about, or there's something very wrong with the United Nations that you should know about. Let's look into the history of both. First, Israel. Ever since its establishment, voted for by the United Nations, by the way, in 1948, Israel has had to fight its neighbors solely in order to survive. It has endured innumerable acts of terrorism, the most intense from 2000 to 2005, the so-called Second Intifada, in which children and other innocents were blown up in places like pizza parlors and buses and at weddings. It still suffers from rocket attacks against civilians from the Gaza Strip, which is controlled by a terror group, Hamas, whose stated reason for existence is to destroy Israel. Israel has developed a strong military and a web of security fences and walls to protect itself. Do these security measures cause hardships to people who must deal with this network? Yes, they do. Israel would like nothing better than to tear all these fences and walls down. But bitter experience informs it as to what would happen if it did. Is Israel a perfect country? Of course not. But it is one of the freest and most open societies in the world. That's Israel's history. Here's the UN's. In 1949, when the UN admitted Israel as a member state, the UN had 58 member countries and a clear democratic and pro-Western orientation. Today, the UN has 193 member countries, most of which are not even free. Among its many negative changes, the UN changed the principle of self-determination from a post-World War II, post-Holocaust human rights principle to a tool to wield against the West, especially against Israel. This reached its fullest expression at the notorious Durban Conference held in South Africa in 2001. The Durban Conference was billed as a UN World Conference against racism and intolerance, but it turned into an orgy of anti-Israel and anti-Jew propaganda. Of all the bad actors in the world, the final Durban Declaration found one state guilty of racial discrimination. You guessed it, Israel. The Durban Declaration, however, remains to this day the centerpiece of the UN's allegedly anti-racism agenda. There's only one country in the world whose very legitimacy is questioned. Only one country that is openly threatened with annihilation. That country is Israel. And what has the United Nations done about it? Worse than nothing. It has itself become a global platform for anti-Semitism and the destruction of the Jewish state. I'm Ann Bayevsky, director of the Turo Human Rights Institute for Prager University.
If aliens ever took over the UN and read their archives, they would surely conclude that Israel is the most evil country on planet Earth. North Korea and Pakistan would be seen as good vacation spots. Am I exaggerating? Let's take a look at some facts about the UN. There are 193 members in the UN. Less than half of them are free countries. Many of them are perpetrators of the worst crimes of our time. So how is it that while hundreds of thousands are being detained and victimized in North Korea, Christians are persecuted in Iraq, women are subjugated in Saudi Arabia, homosexuals are executed in Iran, and civilians, including thousands of children, are gassed to death in Syria? How is it that 85% of the resolutions against countries passed in the UN General Assembly are against Israel, the only real democracy in the Middle East with equal rights, an independent judicial system, and a vibrant free press? Let's start from the beginning. In 1945, after World War II, the nations who defeated fascism established the United Nations to prevent such human devastations from ever happening again. The UN's charter called for reaffirming human rights and equal rights to all men, women, and nations. But over the years, many new states became members. Only a few were democracies. Human rights and equality were pushed to the sidelines in favor of political interests. From the get-go, Israel was at a disadvantage. Muslim and Arab member states outnumbered it and tried to isolate it by threatening Israel's allies with embargoes. And if that weren't enough, Arab, Muslim, and Third World non-aligned countries united into a powerful voting bloc with an automatic majority. Their shared goal was to discredit the US and delegitimize Israel. As it has been famously noted, this voting bloc could pass a resolution that the world is flat and that Israel flattened it. The same bloc prevents actions against oppressive regimes, since many of them are oppressive regimes. Now, after understanding how the UN is structured, it shouldn't surprise you that Iran, the oppressive regime developing nuclear weapons in breach of international agreements, was appointed a member of the United Nations Nuclear Disarmament Committee. This is a country that has threatened to destroy a fellow UN member, Israel. If that isn't enough irony for you, wait. This theater of the absurd reached a climax in the UN Commission on Human Rights, which was run for decades by an overwhelming majority of non-democratic, abuse-ridden countries. In 2003, it was even chaired by Libya under Gaddafi. That's right, this righteous individual was telling us how to make the world a better place. This commission repeatedly condemned Israel, but refused to condemn systematic torture and abuse in over 80 countries, including Sudan, for the massacre of 300,000 citizens in Darfur. At this point, even the UN Secretary General realized something was fundamentally wrong. But the Human Rights Council, which replaced the Commission, still includes many countries that fail to meet even the most minimal standards of a free democracy. They have placed Israel on its permanent human rights agenda. Israel, which has equal rights for all its citizens, minority rights, civil liberties, and a growing population of Jews, Christians, and Muslims. I served in the UN from 1993 to 1997 and saw firsthand the hypocrisy and cynicism of the political interests that have taken over the United Nations. I have watched dictators applauded, murder and terrorism ignored, and human rights turned into a travesty. After understanding how the UN really operates, perhaps the idea of aliens taking over doesn't sound that bad.